Now we're off and running. Okay, great. June 12, 2025, Ninja cohort number 9, module number 3, ask better questions. So the focus is on understanding who belongs in your professional circle. Just because they're nice people doesn't mean they're referable, and they should be viewing you the same way, i.e., just because you're a nice person doesn't inherently make you referable. So you want to be able to focus on making that come together. So part of that is getting into understanding their business and the way they show up. I'll occasionally have people say, well, it feels so impersonal to only talk about business. No, and here's why. You don't have a personhood and then a businesshood. You bring your personhood to work. So you can uncover an understanding of them personally as it relates to the way they show up at work. Right? It's not impersonal to understand how they bring their personhood to work. Okay, so we'll pause there because I want to do a kind of an inbound, reflection or, tone setting question. There's, blanks, and again, straight scratch paper, right? Legal pad will work for the same stuff. I just wanted some nice graphics that we can use, and we're going to get all this, pulled together in the ways that we need to ultimately. And again, apologies, but we'll stop that now. And what I'd like for you to do is take a minute to reflect on kind of the same answer, but you can come at it from two ways. What is a question somebody asked you in a business networking setting or relationship building setting that made you go, that was a really good question? That's pretty cool. I never thought to ask that, right? Jot it down for a minute because we're going to come back to it. We don't want to cover everybody up. I want everybody to reflect. And if you're not sure or don't recall that, one doesn't come to mind easily, ask yourself this question. What's a question that you've asked more than once and gotten consistently good responses from? What's a question that you've asked that the other person said, oh, that's a good question, or you were able to gather quality information from that, right? What's an example of a really good question that could be asked in this setting? And I clearly understand that's what we're teaching on today, but you guys have all been in business long enough for me not to think that you've never encountered, either asked nor been asked, a good question somewhere along the way. So take a minute and jot down the parameters. You don't have to write the whole story line by line, right? But what was the situation or an environment where the question that you asked was very good, or the question that they asked was very good, and it enhanced your ability to know and understand the relationship? Yep, that's kind of the question. What's been working well? All right. Who wants to share what they thought of or have used in the past? Who's got, I know Gretchen's eyes lit up right after I asked that, so maybe she's willing to lead off.
Sure. Uh, a great question that can prompt a great response is tell me something you're excited to be working on right now.
Okay. Oh, so Sarah, you're actually asking, you're saying that's the question that you asked. Got it. Okay. I was framing it in what has been working well for you in networking questions. Okay. Yeah. So how did you phrase it, Gretchen? That was a good way you put it.
Please share with me something you're excited to be working on right now, or tell me something you're excited to be working on right now.
Okay. Cool. That's helpful because what? It tells you about what their work looks like, but it tells you which parts of their work fire them up the most, right? How about you, Justin? You're known for creating quality relationships that are authentic, right? What what's worked in your world?
It's it's more of an intention, or it's more of just it's just curiosity. That's
Hmm.
really what it is. It's just questions related to curiosity.
Okay.
One is like why do you love what you do? And as you know, Daniel, I love archetypes and personalities and the superpowers and the abilities that come from certain personality types. So I try to find that out, like what makes you better at what you do than anyone else? Like what's your entrepreneur superpower? Like what's your entrepreneur gift or ability? And it just lights people up to answer.
Yeah. All right. Matt, what's worked in your world?
Um, the only thing that comes to mind right now, because I've been asked different questions, but one I've been asking has been, what are you currently focused on in building your business right now, and where's the current focus at?
Yep.
Another one actually I haven't asked, I felt uncomfortable, is like, what are your current? I've asked for, but not very often, has been, what is this like? What's your current challenge or current challenge you're facing right now?
I think, what are you working on, right? Or what has your attention, what has your focus is a very good way, particularly with people that you're starting to establish a relationship with.
Yeah,
I think what's keeping you up at night or what's the challenge you're facing, if you've built the relationship to the point where they might feel comfortable sharing that challenge, right?
yeah,
What's fun about, what has your attention? That could go either way, right? It could be what am I excited about, but it could also be, what's my challenge in the moment. Tristan put one in there. What's a problem you see many of your clients dealing with,
that's a good one.
right? That one's I love, by the way, questions that have more than one purpose, that achieve more than one objective. When Tristan asks, right, what's a challenge you see a lot of your clients dealing with, that may open the door for what? Other vendors that you can refer in.
Also, you'll find very quickly that no one can make that list without ruminating against it. And then you get uncurated answers and you really find out the clients that they want, the things they don't want to work with. I don't want a high profit client. I don't want to do a high profit referral that they suck to work with. So like really, I want you to enjoy every interaction. So anytime they can ruminate about, I like no lists. I think it's easier for us to contrast the negative, especially when they're given the free space of non-judgment to give that. And you can normally reverse correlate what good is versus bad. If I hate lemons, I probably like sugar.
Right. As they talk about, what's getting in the way of them serving their clients, it helps you identify which potential clients maybe to take out of the list. Right. Um, and yeah, when you ask people that, they will have to talk it through, right? They don't have a ready-made list there. Right. Okay. Going back to the document. I keep trying to, anyway, Google's making me mad right now, but that shouldn't come as any surprise now, should it? No, no, it should not. Err. Sorry for those watching the recording to watch me experience this frustration because you're not here with us today and you're not having to deal with it. There we go. All right. Let's go through, and I get that this might look a little bit elementary in terms of like fill in the blank on some stuff here, but I know it's the best way to keep your attention and we can elaborate, right? So let's take a look at, right? Looking on at the bottom, it says page 4, but it's page 6 of the document, right? And if you're having trouble opening it, you just jot this down. When did you know that the work you're doing, right? It's blank because it could be the work they're doing, right? When did you know that this career, you can name the career, when did you know that you wanted to do this, right? When did you know, Sarah, that financial services was the route for you, right? And the reason why that's a beautiful question is it tells you the trigger they got into the business. Now, philosophies aside, we were at an event, a local chamber, very casual, very open. It's good, friendly. They can bill themselves as the fun chamber. And they use a icebreaker question every week when they do their coffee hour. And they asked basically that. Why did you decide to get into the business that you're in? And for reasons that I'm unclear on, the local police department usually sends a couple of people to this networking event. And so one of the officers said, well, I wanted a discount on my speeding tickets. I know a lot about that person's character right about now. Right? That's an interesting question because what it tells you about who you're dealing with, right? It's very interesting. All right. What's another way you could phrase that same question or get kind of to the same result? You don't have to rephrase it, but I'm saying the lines underneath that are for you to phrase it in a way that suits your personality better, right? If that phrasing doesn't resonate with you, there's room to reword it. Okay. Tell me about the transition from the work you did. Okay, there we go, right? Ask about people's dreams if they can do anything, why? That's a good one. Right. Now, they may say, if I said to you, I'd always want to be a travel writer and have other people to pay to send me on vacation and then write up my experiences in the form of a review. Does that really tell you about anything about my ability to deliver the work that I do? Right. It may come back to, when you travel, send me a coffee mug, right? Hey, Dan, sorry you couldn't join me in Tahiti. Here's a travel mug that, was thinking of you, right? Tell me about the transition between what you did before and what you're doing now, right? How did you get from there to here? That can be a pretty helpful question because it tells you what they wanted to leave behind, right? Well, I got so fed up with X in this industry or with this company that I decided I need to make a change, which again tells you something about the part of their personhood that they bring to work. Right. I occasionally get asked, why have I been committed to self-employment my whole life? And my response is, it's not my commitment. It's the fact that I'm fundamentally unemployable because I don't put up with BS. And in a corporate environment, you have to put up with BS. At some point, somebody's going to go, that's a good idea, but we're probably never going to do it. And I'm like, then I can't work in a place that can acknowledge that we have a good idea and it's never going to get implemented. What you got, Gretchen?
So the 2 questions ago prompted me to think about, asking about the journey of their career. Like, did you always think when you grew up you were going to be XYZ?
Mm-hmm.
And then that could open up, oh, I started this on this journey, but then I found my gifts were really here. And so that's where I'm focusing on now. So it gives you a background. Like I have one of my referral partners is he owns a pest control company. Okay. Well, his background, he was in pharmaceuticals and science. He was in a laboratory. Like, so he knows the science behind what he's doing in the pest control world, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just an applicator. He understands what he's doing, and that makes him more referable because of that background. But you don't get into that nitty gritty until you ask about the journey that you're on or that person's on. And then they say, oh, well, I started in my degree is in XYZ and I went down that road, but then I found my calling here.
Correct. Because that's right. It helps you understand the gifts or what they bring to that environment. They're passionate about, or they, wanted this, right? And that's super helpful. That's a very good one. There's 2 typos in the next one, by the way, because again, this is on me. Jen and I did not start to rework this until last night. And so it'll get edited eventually. But, do you have a story you'd like to share about a time when you had a negative customer experience and you turned it around? And I'm looking not for the jerk customer that nobody could make happy. I'm not looking for the easy sale that anybody could have sold to. I'm looking for the story where it started off well, went south, almost lost the deal, almost lost the customer, got into a shouting match with the customer, whatever the case may be, and turned it around and still got a 4 or 5 star review out of it. That's one of my favorite questions for several reasons. Again, remember what I said a minute ago about questions that have more than one goal, right? Anytime you can twofer or threefer. One of the reasons I like this question is it's a chance for them to be the hero in the story. What's the size of the audience for stories where they're the hero? How many people are willing to listen to that story? Their spouse, and they've heard it. The audience for that story is very small. They probably told their employees who didn't care, right? So when you give people a chance to, for lack of a better word, brag on themselves, you are fundamentally more likable because you gave them the room for that. That's not the main reason I ask. It's a happy side effect. The main reason I ask is because I want to find out what they think good customer service means. Well, I told him just, keep the work we did for him and I cancel the invoice. If he's just going to whine about it, he can just, I did the work for free. I don't care. That's one approach to customer service. Well, I went back, apologized for using industry terminology that he didn't understand, right? Which meant he had different expectations, right? Or I failed to explain that the weather was going to impact delivery times, which was going to impact completion times. And then we had those crazy storms that he recognized, but he didn't understand that that had a knock-on effect where I couldn't deliver on time, right? And so I reset the expectations, told him I'd do a better job of keeping him up to date about any delays that we might encounter, right? And we're back on the same page. That's also a legitimate approach to customer service. But I might refer some people to the vendor that has, just write it off and get on with it attitude, and some people that believe that they should turn every customer into a advocate and champion for them, right? I might send different people different ways, depending on what I think they need, right? So I absolutely love that question because it gives them a chance to shine. This could be important. Well, it could be important for all of y'all, right? But I think of Gretchen and Sarah particularly when I read this one. Can you tell me about a customer or experience, you can use either word, that really sums up why you do what you do? Have you ever gotten a thank you note, a review, or a testimonial from somebody that you still think about to this day? I was in a room once with some people that I knew, digital room, and Suzanne Taylor King and I both ended up in the same breakout. And rather than take our turn to introduce ourselves when it came around, Suzanne and I took that opportunity to introduce each other. That's a side lesson. There's a lot of value in that for a bunch of reasons. Won't go into it at the moment because we started late. And Suzanne said nice things about me that I wouldn't have said about myself. I'm like, I had no idea. And I said to her, I might need that someday. Can you call my voicemail and repeat that so that I can use it as a pick-me-up when I need it? And she said, yes, when my throat gets better. She never did it. 2 years later, I'm still talking about it. I can't remember what she said, but I remember that it left me with this rosy glow on my face, right? That's pretty wild to me, right? Somebody somewhere along the way, right? Sarah, you sold somebody an insurance product, turned out they needed it sooner than they thought, and they were thankful to you for having made that sale, right? And that sticks with you. They say in the life insurance business, you'll never forget the first claim check that you deliver, death benefit, right? Because you're able to go to somebody's family and say they were thinking of you, right? It's pretty wild. Okay. This is a good one. What do you wish people knew about your industry, but they don't? Right. Yeah, there you go, Tristan. A good way to ask the same question. It's great. Okay. What do you wish people knew about your job or industry, but they don't? Sarah laughed. What's your answer to that question?
Well, the answer could take hours, but I thought my industry was probably like the most boring ever before entering it. And now I could talk about certain topics for hours where people's eyes are glazing over, and I'm like, you could do this and you could do that. Like,
For most of us, our industry is exciting to us because we're in it. And it should be exciting the right prospect. So maybe you talk for hours just to see who's still with you at the end. I don't think that's a good idea, sir. All right. What is an assumption about you or your work that is what is an assumption about, you can leave out the word or, what is an assumption about your work that is inaccurate? It kind of goes with a different way of saying it, phrasing the same question. What is an assumption about your work that is accurate? If you were going to hire a new employee, would it be someone like you or not like you, and why? And they may quickly tell you the parts of their job they don't like. Yep. One term or concept you wish your clients already understood. Where do you see your business or job in 5 years? That's a fairly significant question. Depending on what they do for a living, if somebody said to me, oh, I probably won't even still be doing the same thing 5 years from now, that might eliminate them from my referral pool, depending on the nature of the work. It might not. If you're pressure washing houses, okay, still likely to send business your way. There's a subtle difference in the way women look at their children versus the way they look at husbands when they enter the room. Gretchen's kid, one of what Gretchen's kids just came through. I could see the love in the eyes, Gretchen. That was beautiful. Encouraging those kiddos. All right. What part of your job would you reduce, eliminate, or delegate if you could? Pardon the typos, guys. That's on me. I didn't review Jenna's work last night, so. The one at the bottom of the page that's marked as 5, which I believe is, page 7 if you're scrolling, is under what circumstances would you feel comfortable referring people to me? I believe that's a fairly important question to ask. This is one that has about 5 or 6 reasons to ask it, by the way. I believe it's a good question to ask near the end of your first get to know you meeting or near the beginning or middle of the second. Under what conditions would you feel comfortable referring business to me? Here's a list of the reasons in no particular order why it's a good question to ask. Number 1, what if they say, my brother-in-law does what you do? I'm never going to send business your way. Wouldn't you like to know that sooner rather than later? Carter approached me. He's financial services guy in Myrtle Beach, Sarah. Probably might ought to refer him to you as a recruit. And he had a CPA that he had sent 20 clients to. And then he went to the CPA and he says, "You never send business my way. I'm curious. I've sent a lot of business your way." The guy's like, "Oh, we got a whole division that does financial planning. It's just not on my card because it's not my division. All the referrals are internal." Wouldn't Carter have been served to know that about 19 referrals ago? Right? Under what conditions do you feel comfortable for business? Some people will excuse themselves from being part of your inner circle at that point. Very few. But if it is a no, Justin, I want to know that now, right? Here's another reason to ask that question. You'll surprise yourself at the number of people that go, "We're good to go." That's why you ask it near the end of the first or the beginning of the second. Here's what speeds that process up. Here's how you become credible in other people's minds, referable in other people's minds at the end of a 20 or 30-minute get to know you meeting. By the end of a 20 or 30-minute get to know you meeting. If you're getting introduced to your prospects and your referral partners and referral sources by other trusted sources, the assumption is you're referable when they come through the door. We talked about this in module 1. What's being passed from person to person is not a name. What's being passed from person to person is the trust attached to the relationship that's already been built. And the number of people that have referred people to spend as much as $25,000 with me or said they were willing to spend $25,000 with me at the end of my first 20-minute Zoom call with them would blow your mind. And it's not because I've got magic in my 20 minutes. I mean, I do, but that's, I don't know, 5%, 10%, 30% of the conversation. The reason they have trust in me is because they were referred by somebody they trust. Another reason it's a good question to ask. You now have given yourself permission to ask the question. If you know what their standard is, when you've met it, you now have given yourself permission to ask for the referral. I hear that all the time. I'm never sure when's the right time to ask for the referral. Well, ask them when would be the right time to ask for a referral, right? When I was new here in town, I developed a friendship and a client relationship with a guy who's a general contractor, home repairs, large and small. I lived in an apartment. Unless I wanted to hire him to hang pictures on my wall, which is not a good use of his time and not a good use of my money. He was probably charging me $150 an hour, right? I wasn't going to be able to refer or endorse him. So in order to cross that bridge, Matt, I said, when you're doing work or a job on my side of town and you get to the end or near the end, let me know. I'll knock off and drive over to take a look at your work so that I can tell people legitimately, I've seen his work up close and personal, and it's really good. Right? I've dealt with a number of CPAs in my life. Let me phrase that correctly. I've met a lot of CPAs in my life. Up until about 6 or 7 years ago, I filed my own tax return. I was a Schedule C, a 1099 for another brand, the same brand that Gretchen represents now, as most of y'all know. And, filling out a Schedule C as a U.S. tax form at the end of the year was pretty straightforward, kept up with where the tax laws were to my benefit. And I started going to networking events, right, when I joined the B2B world in 2003, and would occasionally meet CPAs. What do you do? I do this. And they would ask, naturally, understandably, advisedly, who does your taxes? I say, I usually do it myself. I'd love a crack to, help you out with that. And I'd say, that's cool. We can talk about it. And then I would ask 2 questions as if I did not know the answer. I knew the answer. And every CPA I asked either got the answer, well, they didn't know the answer. meaning they either got it wrong or they're like, I don't even think that's a thing. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm mistaken. They're not referable to somebody who's self-employed in my mind, right? If any one of them had gotten the answers to those two questions right, they would have been a referable. What were the questions? Interesting you said that question. All right. This will be news for probably most of y'all. Justin, are you subject to U.S. tax laws because your income, some of your income's generated in the United States?
Yeah, it all goes to Stripe, which deposits to my American bank account. So when I want to get funds, I have to use
Yeah.
my debit card and go to a Thai ATM. That's the easiest way to do it.
And you
Yeah.
have to file a U.S. tax return, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay. So this will be relevant even for you.
Yeah.
The two questions, one probably more relevant, but Sarah, this is a piece of information that you can use probably potentially in your business. The first question is, what's the per diem rate for a self-employed person? What the what? Self-employed does not mean unemployed. Self-employed means you are the employer and the employee. Have any of y'all worked for a corporation or had somebody in your family or known somebody that worked for a corporation, and when they traveled for work, they were given a per diem? It means by the day. It's Latin for by the day. Right? When my first wife worked for Arthur Anderson before they got in that mess down in Texas and screwed themselves up, she was an auditor. She would leave town Sunday night, come back Friday night. Not good for a marriage, let me tell you. Not cool. And rather than have her submit receipts for dry cleaning and breakfast and lunch and dinner and coffee from the vending machine and all that stuff, which would be tax deductible to them, but not taxable to her because she spent it on business, meaning it was given by the company for business. So she's just the pass through, right? The company deducts it from their income as the cost of doing business. And she was just the conduit, right? It passes through her. She was like the vendor for all her meals and dry cleaning, so to speak, is one way to think of it. Okay. If you're self-employed, you still travel. You can write off when you travel for work, and you should look into the details of exactly the definitions of travel for work. A daily rate based on when you're on the road, whether or not you spend the money. Whether or not the money actually gets spent. No receipts are required at the corporate level or if you're self-employed. They don't ask for receipts. That's the definition of per diem. They assume a certain number. And the IRS does it because they don't want firms nor their organization caught up in executing 87,000 receipts per person, right? That's just a ridiculous concept to them. Okay. All right. And I had people go, oh, I don't think self-employed get a per diem. I'm like, you're never getting a look at my crack at my tax return, right? So that was one. What's this tax per diem rate for self-employed people? Second question. What's the latest you can contribute to a SEP IRA? What's the latest you can contribute to a SEP IRA for the previous year? SEP stands for something much longer, but I like to pretend it stands for self-employed because that's the only context I ever was worried about it. What's the date? The due date. And everybody I ever spoke to said April 15th. That is not accurate. It is the due date of the tax return. And if you file an extension, that means it is now October 15th. You can put money away into a savings plan, if you've got it structured correctly, up until October 15th of 2025 and write it off against your income in 2024 in a SEP IRA. Not a Roth, not a standard. It's got to be a SEP. All right, those were the two questions. If anybody had answered those correctly, they would have been referable in my mind because I'm like, okay, they know their stuff, particularly for self-employed people, right? All right. I do have somebody handling my stuff now. And of course, she was able to answer those questions or she wouldn't be handling my stuff, right? Okay. I think might be a repeat. What would you delegate if you could, right? What do you hope to accomplish in the next 30 to 60 days? Do you have any really big goals? I ask this question in a lot of settings. If I met you a year from now, right, and you were just popping the cork on a bottle of champagne, what would you be celebrating? What would that represent? Right. Tristan and I have discussed that, what were we going to celebrate? Because we're co-creating something, joint venture here. We talked about 30, 90, and 360-day champagne celebrations, right? I'll have to go back and jog my memory on what blank about, right? I don't remember that one.
Also, if you have the champagne chilling in your refrigerator and you look at it every day when you open your refrigerator, that's also a good motivator and ties you into your everyday goals right off the bat when you go in to make your eggs in the morning.
Yeah. Here's one that relates to something Sarah said right at the bottom of page 6. What is your goal for what you could be doing in 10 years, right? That's helpful. Okay, these are in addition to a fairly basic set of questions, which I'll get back out to you guys later today. For those who are going to show up at Premiere, we're gonna use this outline in the paired interviews that we're doing for those of you that are part of Premiere. And right, who do you serve? Right, what's the output of working with you? Who do you serve? Who could your key referral partners be? Right, because you do need to understand the business model itself. I don't think, by the way, that you need to use this whole list ever. Right, that's excessive. I would go through that, either pick some or rewrite 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 that you really enjoy, that really speak to you, and use those as your main ones on a consistent basis, right? You don't need 27 questions to get there, right? Just answering those would take up 45 minutes one way, and you've only got 20 to 25, right, to go both directions. But any 1 or 2 of those can be a really great way to open the door to some conversations. But definitely make sure that you understand the output of working with them, who they serve, what a key referral partner could be for them. I also like to ask, and it depends on the industry, right? When somebody engages with you, how long do they typically work with you? Right? Justin has a coaching modality about understanding yourself and other people's, archetypes and personalities and what motivates them and how they respond to both good and bad circumstances. Right. And it's what it was 8-week, 12-week program. Right. With Sarah, the answer is forever. Right. Once I'm your financial advisor, you never need another one. Right. With Gretchen, it's as long as you're in business, right? I'm handling your business gifts. Right. But I need to know that that's the nature of a relationship. And another related question is, what does the average customer spend with you? Now, in Sarah Snyder's case, right, spend, it's not really a spend, right? They're going to invest as much as they're going to invest, right? But if Gretchen was doing gifts, at $5 a pop or 50 and not 500 or 5,000, that changes who I introduce her to, right? And Matt, what I usually say is, hey, I'm not trying to duplicate your business model. I'm only asking because it will help me understand who I need to introduce you to. But when somebody engages you to help them with the work that you do, how long are they normally working with you, side by side? And on the average, what do they spend? Well, it depends. I said, no, see, I didn't ask the range. I said, what's the average? The average doesn't depend. The average is the average, right? People understand statistics. Right? I said, fine, give me the range, right? And we'll figure out the average from there. right? I met somebody that does resume coaching at $1,200. I met somebody that does resume coaching at $2,400. I met somebody that does resume coaching at $5,000. I'm going to introduce those people to different people, right? So it's worth understanding those sorts of questions. It's going to help you figure out if you've got anybody in your circle. There's one more question I really think you need to ask. It should be, right? Do you feel like, I don't know if anybody's crossed your mind while we're talking or not, but whether they have or they haven't, do you feel like you know some people that you could or should introduce me to for the work I do? Because if they come up, if they're like, yeah, I don't really know anybody. Oh, okay. They probably do, but they're indicating they're not willing to think of them, right? The way my brain works, right? I ask those questions. What do you do? Who do you do it for? Who do you keep referral partners? And so the end of my first conversations usually goes like this. Hey, Justin, just while we were talking, right? I thought about, you wrote down 5 categories and I thought of at least 3 people that fit those categories of key referral partners for you, right? If you feel like you know some people that you could introduce me to, I would love to give you a scheduling link so we can talk about, what it looks like. We can co-author some introductions, meaning I want you to help me write the introduction to these people. I want to include what you want me to say, but I want it to come from my natural language, so I'm not going to let you just forward me a cut and paste, right? If we schedule that a week or 2 out, would that be enough time for you to go back to your list of contacts and figure out if there's some people that you could introduce me to? Not sure. Great. I'll send you the link. If you feel like we can make some mutual introductions, go ahead and book that. Right. But my brain works. I usually have a name or 2. If you don't, man, you could say, hey, Matt, you gave me some really good categories. I'm perfectly willing to invest the time to go through LinkedIn on my calendar and see who I've spoken to recently or who has a lot of confidence in me that I can introduce you to that might fit some of these criteria. If you're willing to do the same for me, I'm happy to send you a link or accept a booking link from you. We'll book it, a week or 2 out when we've had time to go through our LinkedIn and figure out who we could introduce each other to. Right. Do you want it? Is that something you want to pursue? Well, I'm not sure. Great. Let me send you the link. If you ever get yourself on my calendar, I'll recognize it for what it is, and we'll be able to make some introductions for each other. I absolutely believe that you've got to co-author those introductions. And I'm not trying to jump out of myself and coach module 6 on module 3, but these are all of a piece, right? There's nothing I will say in one module that contradicts any other module, and they tend to reinforce each other, right? Give you a great example of one that doesn't work well, right? Let me find it real quick. Somebody screenshot an introduction that they received that was not co-authored. Person A, person B. Person B said, I'm trying to figure out how to name these people, right? So-and-so does X for work. I thought she may be a good resource for you to connect with. Nobody's going to reply to that. Not either one of the people that were included in that introduction sees any reason to respond to that. You've got to co-author them. If your first 1 or 2 conversations is going well, and by the way, if you were referred to your referral partner, referral source, the most you should need is 1 if you're asking deep questions. If you met them cold or DM them cold, you might need 2. And I, can document that. Then if you've become referable in that person's mind, there's only 3 roadblocks to them giving you referrals. They either aren't exactly sure who, they aren't exactly sure how, or they didn't actively put the time on their calendar to make those intros. when you book a referral pairing, when you book a co-author session, whatever you want to call it, you've eliminated all three challenges. You're going to review who you want to introduce them to and why, and they're going to tell you thumbs up or thumbs down. They're going to review with you who they want to introduce you to, and you're going to let them know thumbs up or thumbs down. So you're going to fine tune the who, you're going to co-author the how, and clearly it's on the calendar. It's mind bending. But that's what you need to do. You've got to co-author those referrals, those introductions, I should say, at the early stages. What does that mean? I don't know. Until both of you are like, yeah, we don't need to do this. I got you. Right? Questions, comments? I feel bad because we kicked off late. Don't know that we're going to have a good time to use breakout. There's not that many of us anyway, so maybe we can accomplish whatever we want to right here. Big shift. Anything that made you go, huh, that's interesting? Anybody respond that way to anything I said? Justin said, this is good. I got to get a recording of this. What were we referring to? What made you, we've been going for an hour now. What made you put that in the, what made you put that in the
Well, I
box?
mean, just the process of I made a note of it, and then like I mean, it's 9:50 p.m. here, so my brain is like winding down. So I'm like, I should write this down. I should take notes, but I'm just gonna make sure I get the recording. So,
Which is fine.
um, co-authoring the introductions, like that part, I was like, man, that's so good, and you just said so many nuggets, and I'm like, oh, my
Okay.
brain's shutting down. I got to get the recording.
By the way, props to Justin for showing up at this hour of the night, right? I appreciate
Thank you,
that, man.
thank you.
It really does
Yeah.
mean a lot to me. All right. So we'll get the the recording will go up. If I can figure out how to effectively modify the event that we were just in, by the way, we'll make sure an email goes out with the recordings in it. Stephanie handles that for me. I will modify this event to include a link to this recording and a link to the cohort 9 playlist. So we'll have module 1, module 2, module 3, and a couple other things in there too. There's a recording of a referral pairing. There's a recording of a get to know you meeting. If you ever want to record one of your get to know you meetings with somebody, I'll go out on a limb and say I will make a very sincere effort to watch it or at least read the transcript, right? And give you some feedback if that's what you think you want. But if you're successful in the get to know you meetings and you've become referable in the other person's eyes, then there's only 3 reasons they're not. They're not exactly sure who, they're not actually sure how. They just did not put the time on the calendar to think about you, which is understandable. People are busy thinking about what? Their own needs. The child, the spouse, the other business, the messages that have been coming in. Right. The only reason I don't have to check my phone starting about 10 till any event is because Stephanie is checking my phone. Even in live events, I hand her my phone at 10 till and go, I ain't touching that. Right. Because people don't have the time block. They got other things pulling at their attention, which is fine because you got other things pulling at your attention. By the way, I will say this as we're getting near the end of the wrap up. Understand that most of us operate on a double standard for most of our time on the planet. Right? Gretchen's late to meet me. Clearly, she has no respect for my time. I'm late to meet Gretchen. Clearly, she does not understand traffic in Columbia, South Carolina. Right? I see this post every so often. It says, "I'm sorry I was late. Traffic was exactly the same as it has been every day for the last 5 years, and I didn't expect that." If you're ever frustrated that people promised you referrals if they meet a good prospect for you and nothing ever came of it, it doesn't mean they were liars. Ponder for a moment how many people you might have said that to and you never followed through. So the co-author session or the referral pairing, whatever you want to call it, is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing because it handles, they're not sure who, And that goes both directions. You might not be sure who to introduce them to. Not sure who, not sure how. You didn't put the time on your calendar. But to consistently practice that. And by the way, if somebody doesn't step into that, that's okay, because you have other people that will step into that role. Does that make sense? I love the idea of saying, do you want to get into a meeting where we can do this? The things that you do that show that you've got a plan and a process inherently increase your credibility in that person's mind. They don't have a plan or a process. They don't have a plan or a process. If they did, they already would have executed it, and they wouldn't be adding new people except by introduction. Right? So when you show that you've got a plan and a process, they absolutely respect that. And don't be afraid of taking the lead on that stuff. I got into one once, and he's still sending referrals. A guy named Nicholas Alter. Not that it matters to you. And he's like, I got this intro for you, and I'm like, okay, let's co-author it. So we wrote one, right? And I put it in there, and he goes, okay, now I've got somebody else who's a very different category. And I said, okay, well, let me start to type some ideas into the chat box. We can co-author this one. And he goes, yeah, And I said, Nicholas, you're about to tell me you've been in business for a long time and you made a lot of successful introductions and you know how to do this. He goes, yeah, that's kind of where I was headed. I said, tell you what, let me finish typing this out. You type one out at the same time. And I got to the end before he did and hit send in the chat box. And he paused and he looked at it. He goes, yeah, that's a lot better than the one I had. I'm like, it's okay, Nicholas. I do this all day, every day. I think about this. I'm very aware of what makes a good one and a bad one. It's okay that mine was better than yours. It doesn't mean you're not good at this. It just means I've thought this through. Right? It's a beautiful thing. Because what you don't need is, I thought she'd be a good connection for you. Well, and I would say, Gretchen, that it's not my gift. It's what I learned the hard way. There are people in this town that when they found out I moved back and I was coaching relationship skills, are like, the guy from the 90s that ran a business here? Is this the same Daniel Andrews? Are we talking about the same guy? Because I wouldn't have guessed that was true. And I was very successful at what I did in the 90s and early 2000s. But as my first wife likes to say, Daniel's good in small doses. I think the only reason my second wife doesn't say that is because she knows my first wife used to say that. I'm sure she thinks that about. I'm sure she thinks that about 6 times a day. Somebody lightheartedly said to me today, when he asked me, I said I might be late to the event, and he said, "Is Adina going to be here?" And I'm like, so I got to the event. I'm like, what does that got to do with anything? He goes, well, everybody likes her when they like you. So I repeated that during the car on the way home. She's like, why do you suppose that is? She's like, why don't you reflect on that for a minute? I think what is my gift, Gretchen, is teaching and knowing where people are at and where they need to be. Right? Ken Schmidt, which is a name that won't mean anything to you, but he won #1 branch and #1 rep for the year 4 years in a row while he was in college. #1 rep and #1 branch for the year 4 years in a row. I was in college. Said to me, "You're the single best trainer I've ever seen." And here's what makes me a pretty good trainer. The things I sucked at, I chose to get good at. You'll notice that the naturally gifted athletes almost never become coaches. It was the B players that become coaches because they were naturally F players and they decided to get as good as they could. And they understand the growth from where you're at. So my gift is to take people on that journey, and a subset of that gift is to be able to identify where people are at when they start.
Someone with natural dexterity cannot teach someone how to catch better. Someone with natural charisma cannot teach someone because they have no practice. They're gifted with it, but as a side effect,
They don't know what it takes. They don't know what goes into that.
Yes,
Right.
it's all subconscious.
All
I like
subconscious.
those naturally charismatic people who just can talk and it works. I put so much effort into not upsetting people.
Right. Exactly. So it's anyway. But thank you for that, Gretchen. But again, not my gift. My gift is just figuring out, systematizing, the things that I know that can be true. Right. So anyway, fun. We'll get the recording out. Anything anybody want to add, say, talk about, reflect on before we close out?
I'm just sidetracked trying to find the self-employed per diem information now. Like, wait, what did he just say? I
The
almost got
IRS
self-employed.
website is not going anywhere anytime soon. You can check on that later. All right. I'll see some of y'all at Premiere in about 45 minutes. All right. Rock and roll.
Thanks.
You got it. Bye for now.